Shall we start with 3 ohms, maybe?
Sure.
So you've recently published this book, Practicing the Yoga Sutras, and I'm very curious, what inspired you to write this?
My students. I own a yoga studio. We call it a shala in Charlottesville, and about, 10, 11 years ago in 2013, I met an extraordinary woman, Dr. Jayashree, in Mysore, India, when I was there studying at the Ashtanga Yoga Institute. And she taught me how to chant all kinds of things, including the sutras. And so I had been chanting the sutras with her, and I wanted to keep chanting. So when I came back to Charlottesville, this was before I owned it, the previous studio owner, woman Jennifer Elliott, and I started a chanting group on Sunday mornings. We call it Yoga Church. So we get together, and just so that I wouldn't forget. And so from 2013 until COVID, until 2020, I would go and study with Dr. Jayashree in India for 1, 2, sometimes 3 months, and then come back and continue to chant with my students. And what we found was that naturally, as we chanted the sutras and we started to know them by heart, just from repetition, we started to think more about meaning. And that's the way classically Indians tend to study sacred texts. First, they chant them and they know them by heart. And then once they inhabit you as sound, then you start to throw your intellect at it. And so we started having these discussions, and the discussions were super fruitful. And because I was kind of leading the group at that point, I felt like I had to do a little research. So this Swami Satchidananda's Sutras book was my first commentary, and then I started collecting them. And this kind of grew into a really dynamic study group. And at some point, one of my students said, "When are you going to start writing this stuff down?" And I was like, "Yeah, okay, that's an idea." And so I started just kind of one sutra at a time, making notes. And then I think around maybe 2016 or 17, I started to develop a sankalpa, a commitment to gathering up this information and these discussions into a shareable format, and that became a book. So it was very organic. I didn't decide I want to write a book about something, and it just grew out of this community that I'm in.
So you mentioned it was a sankalpa, so writing itself in a way was a practice for you that you were called to take on.
Yeah, and I really, in the book, I talk about the importance of setting a sankalpa when you're taking on a new goal or a new project. And my experience has been that it's one by one by one by one, slowly and over a long time. So the book really, I wrote it for about 5 years. It sped up toward the end. And when Swami Premananda of Integral Yoga Publishing, I gave her a chapter and she said, "Yes, we want to publish this." Then when I had a publisher, I sort of sped it up. But I wrote that book from 4:30 to 5:30 in the morning every day for years, and that's a sankalpa in my mind, is this kind of consistent, almost relentless dedication to something. And it's bit by bit by bit by bit. So it's not like a small, heavy lift. It's like the discipline. And so, That's what Yoga Church has been. We've been doing it now for 12 years. We finally gotten to book 4. We're chanting book 4 and we're studying it, but it's taken us, a decade to get that far. That's how careful, one by one, really slowly. And that's how I learn and teach asana. And I don't know, it's a really, especially for sutra study, it's a very fruitful approach to take it in tiny chunks and just make it part of a daily lived experience instead of trying to dive in deep and finish the book in a weekend. And
Yeah. Do you think that that's an important component in producing something that's of great value, is having it be like a practice itself, like the focus on the journey as opposed to just the destination?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a family of writers. My mother is a biographer. My sister is a young adult novelist. My other sister is also a novelist. And we talk about writing a lot. And we talk about the most important and the most difficult thing is getting yourself in the chair, just sitting down and starting. And I've been a yoga practitioner, an asana practitioner for 24, 25 years. Same thing, getting the mat rolled out is, the most difficult piece and the most critical piece. And I think writing is the same way. And practicing any sort of spiritual practice, if it doesn't have that quality of relentless, kind of repetitive practice, relentless, repetitive dedication, it usually doesn't ever gain traction. So retreats and things are important. They can really up-level your commitment or your experience, and they can also give you kind of a chance to break out of the routine. But this book, the structure of my book, Practicing the Yoga Sutras, is actually designed to be done a little bit at a time for a very long time. I think I have a couple of students who got through the whole book in a month or two because they were nursing an injury and needed something to do when they were sitting around icing their foot or, something like that. I have another friend who has had the book for a few months and he reads it at night before bed. So, but that regular quality, it's interesting how the book became a practice item, that I read novels, I devour them, I read them really quickly. And this book can't be experienced that way. It would be like turning a fire hose on,
You mentioned that for many, maybe all of us, the most challenging component is often, getting into the chair, rolling out the mat, that first step, on the journey. Does that connect to a specific sutra to you?
Yeah, there's one. My students laugh at me because I say this to them all the time. We even have a T-shirt at AYC that has this at the bottom. It's Satudirga Kala Nairantarya Satkara Sevito Drudabhumihi, and it means practice becomes well established when you do it for a long time, without break, and with faith, with earnestness, so you think it's going to work. And the first time I ever heard that sutra spoken out loud was our teacher in India. He was giving a conference to 400 students packed into this little room, and we were all just hanging on his every word. And he said it with this kind of forbearing quality, Satudirga Kala Nairanta, because he was kind of fed up with us, because we were a bunch of eager beaver Westerners who were like, okay, when am I going to be enlightened? What, I've been here for 3 months. When's it going to happen? And, he comes from a culture, and the Yoga Sutras come from a culture where things take a long time, and there is this incredibly focused, detailed, relentless quality to studying anything. And this is why, Indians become excellent physicians and engineers, and they have this quality of attention over time and this ability to discipline their minds that I think arises from this Vedic culture, that raised them, including, the Gita, the Upanishads, and the Yoga Sutras. And our impatience in the West, the sutras are great medicine for the Western mind. I mean, they're good for everybody, but for the Western mind, we especially need this sort of, treatment that the sutras offer and the intelligence that they recommend for our minds, because our minds are out of control.
Yeah. I want to come back to that, but so yes, I hear the importance of practicing for a long time without break. But what about, I find that there's something to being aware that the first step when you practice is the most challenging one, right? So like awareness of just that. In order to practice for a long time continuously without a break, I need to become comfortable with taking that first step again and again and again and again.
Yeah, I mean, working with a community of yoga students for now, I don't know, going on 15 years, and having my students fall in and out of practice, I think in order to create that sankalpa, the commitment, there have to be a few things in order. And one is you need a sangha, you need a community, you need someone going, where were you? And so my teacher, Saraswathi Jois, who's now 83, lives in Mysore, India, she had hundreds of students at a time, and we were required to attend certain classes. And if you didn't show up, 2 days later, you'd see her and she'd go, where were you Saturday? And you're just looking at her like, how did you know? You look in this sea of people and you don't. And to know that someone is wondering where you are. So that's why, traditionally, any kind of study in yoga, any kind of yoga practice there's a student-teacher relationship that's at the center of that experience. And part of it is your teacher is looking for you. Where were you? Where are you? Show up. So there's a sense of accountability. And if you don't have a teacher, you can have a buddy or something. But someone besides your own ego needs to be aware of whether you're showing up. And then you just need to be able to arrange your life to make it happen. So like a lot of times the reason people don't practice whatever it is, whether it's writing or, a yoga, an asana practice or a meditation practice, is because their life is sort of cluttered and there's no momentum, there's no routine, And so like for me, I have to go to bed at 8:30 at night, because in order for me to have my sitting meditation and pranayama practice before I have a long asana practice and then teach my students, all of this happens before 9:30 in the morning. I have to get up at 4:30. And so what that means for me is I can't watch TV. Like there's certain things that you shift around in your life to accommodate like a yoga practice with some traction, You can't have it all. So I think part of the sankalpa is being like, okay, so what am I willing to exchange for this? Because it costs us something. Any commitment we make has a cost. So for me, I go to bed really early and I eat dinner early. And anyway, there are other things, but yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think of priorities. So I often find like the inner world has so many things that I care about. But what do I really care about most? So in like this example, right? Like watching TV late at night. How important is that to me? And how important is it to me to have a morning practice, right? And this connects to, I think, what's happening in the minds of most Westerners maybe, is that things are happening so fast all the time that I don't know if we're often stopping to think about questions like that. Like, what is really the most important thing to me,
Yeah, and I think for us, we're in the Kali Yuga. We're in this difficult time, and perhaps now it's the most difficult because we literally have instant access to a circus for the mind at every moment. So the mind, resists stillness, silence, discipline. Like it just doesn't think it wants that. And then when it steps into stillness and it goes, this is what I've been looking for. And it's interesting, TV, we're all like, yeah, too much media. But when the mind is on social media or television, it's ekagrata. It's in one place. It's a one-pointed mind. For me at least, I get distracted by this stuff. Like I'm deep dive into whatever the media is, and my mind craves that experience. And this is what meditation offers the mind, is this one-pointed focus. And so like we can see when our minds crave something, instead of being like, bad mind, we can ask the question, okay, why does my mind crave television? Because it wants to rest from its preoccupation with ego drama, and TV does that for me. So does social media. I can be in somebody else's drama or whatever, unfortunately, and so do drugs and alcohol. And there's this really interesting sutra in the fourth pada that says we can attain samadhi, the liberated mental state. We can do it through having good previous births, so we're kind of born samadhi-like. We can do it through drugs. We can do it through practice, or we can do it through a combination of concentration, meditation, this mind. And what they say is, and we know this, people have experimented with different pathways to mental liberation, but the only one that doesn't create karma, the only one that doesn't leave us heavier than we arrived, is the meditation path. So I can watch TV for an hour and have this experience of, my mind is in one place and it's not in my own drama, it's in that drama, and wow. But I'm left with all these impressions. So there's more clutter and there's more heaviness than when I started. Now I've got their stories to deal with. Where in meditation, the same one-pointed mind leaves me lighter, leaves me more a sense of freedom and expansiveness and like a greater awareness. Even though both activities satisfy the craving of the mind, just like we can trip out into samadhi-like states with drugs or with other things, but they leave us heavier, than we were before. They leave us kind of karma laden. And I think that's why what I love about Patanjali and the Yoga Sutras is that there's no like shame or kind of arbitrary ethical and moral rules. There's just experience. And Patanjali says, look at your own experience. Test this in your own experience. This is what yoga is. Test this in your own life. See what happens. The results are what are true for you. So I'm not going to tell you what to believe and then you go off and try to act your way into that. I'm going to give you things to try. Try this. And he's great because in the first sutra, in Samadhipada, he says, okay, meditation is the solution to the chaos in your mind. And you're like, but I can't meditate. I can't do that. And he goes, okay, try this thing. That doesn't work. Try this thing. Okay, try this thing. And he keeps going. And at the end, he says, and if none of this works, anything that makes you feel happy and uplifts you, try that thing. So he gives you like, there's no escape because he says, whatever it is that brings your mind to a state of calm equanimity, do that thing. That's just as good as the other things. And he's really, he's non-dogmatic. Whoever Patanjali is, the guy with the body of the snake. But that non-dogmatism, I think, is an amazing fit for our culture. This is why I think Patanjali is so relevant because it's non-sectarian. There are no devas, there are no gods and goddesses in the sutras. There's no religion. There's Ishvara kind of shimmering in the distance, this kind of very vague idea of like a personal, like higher power type thing, but it figures in such a light way that the sutras can work with our modern sensibilities without creating a lot of friction, you know? There's nothing in there that makes modern people go, what? Except maybe walking through walls and stuff like that. The stuff in the fourth book, but yeah, and the third book. I mean, some of that's pretty trippy, but you can understand that in a way that's also like spooky, you know? All of those sutras have, I think, different possibilities for interpretation that aren't all trippy.
So what's your interpretation of that?
Well, like for instance, Swami Satchidananda, I've heard that when he was in the body, I never met him in the body, but when he was in the body, he could walk into a room and be the biggest thing in the room, like so shining, so full of like tejas, that everyone looked at him and he was like giant. He was a giant. Or he could walk into a room and be invisible. He could make himself so small that no one even noticed he was there. So there are sutras that say the accomplished yogi can make himself invisible. The accomplished yogi can make himself enormous. And so we can understand that literally, like invisible, you know, like Harry Potter and his thing, his cape. Or we can understand that on a pranic level, like energetically. And we know what it's like to make ourselves small and to make ourselves big. Like we've had that experience. So I think a lot of the sutras in the third book that read kind of weird, if you read them with a little bit of poetic intelligence, they make sense, you know, just like reading the Bible or the Torah or, you know, some of Lord Buddha's writings. If you read them literally, they are a little fantastic. But if you read them with a kind of poetic open mind, we go, oh yeah, I've experienced making myself big, making myself small, you know, things like that.
Yeah. Well, I think it also connects with kind of this idea of being dogmatic, right? The same thing with the book. It's funny. I think a part of the human experience is having allegiance often, right? So it's like you start to read something and you love it so much and it's impacting you. And then you're like, this is my thing. Like, I'm a person who loves the Yoga Sutras, right? And then you go through in a way that allegiance, I think, can maybe cause you to not see each part clearly because you've already made the decision, I love this thing. Therefore, you don't have that same ability to be objective. And I think the same thing could happen with the teacher, like what you're talking about, right?
All the time.
It's very interesting, this relationship with a teacher, and I don't think it's so simple, right? It's like Patanjali is offering, like, try this, try this, like, which is, I think, the best kind of teacher, which understands, but it's still walking a line, because it's like, I'm offering you something to believe potentially that can impact you, but I'm still telling you to explore on your own and see if this works for you. Like, the best teachers acknowledge that everyone has the freedom, and they see that you can only get so far by kind of telling someone else, like, listen to me above you. Maybe that's what it also automatically comes down to. Like, what is the teacher saying? It's saying, don't listen to yourself, listen to me, or I'm offering you something. Of course, you always have to listen to yourself. This is the way life is.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a culture full of fundamentalisms, and, you know, fundamentalism is when falling in love with something becomes dogma, and it becomes like fear-based and insecure, you know, because if our loves are secure, we don't have to be fundamentalists. But I think when, in yoga especially, I mean, my background is, I was a religious scholar. Like, I've studied religion my whole life, and religion is based on theology and systems of belief that are at least inherently rational or work with each other, and it's based on faith, you know. Yoga, especially the yoga presented in the sutras, and I think it's in the Gita too, although Krishna's role in the Gita can confuse it, because people are like, well, I don't believe in Krishna, so all this doesn't matter to me. But Krishna as a person is like a placeholder in the Gita, I think. But in the sutras, you're not told to believe anything. It's only try this, have this experience, practice. And if you practice, you will either decide that this is true, this works, this takes me toward the steady mind, nirodha, or this does not work for me. And Patanjali's waiting and going, okay, then try this. All right, I'll try this. But the lack of dogma, what's interesting about it, and if Patanjali is the teacher and we're the student-teacher relationship with Patanjali, is that when you have a teacher who's telling you what to do and how to do it, you have no responsibility. You just follow instructions. And if you're told to do something you think, I don't want to do that, or that doesn't even sound right to me, or I don't feel good here, then you default to obedience, and then you kind of spiritualize your obedience, and you're off the hook as a moral agent,
Off the hook as a moral agent.
Yeah,
I love that.
You don't have to be a moral agent because someone else is doing that for you. And Patanjali, there is no getting off the hook. In yoga, we are 100% responsible for our thoughts, our feelings, and our behavior. No outs. So we can't blame our parents. We can't blame the crappy teachers we had in the past. We can't blame our bodies. We can't blame our, quote, ADD or whatever it is. Because whatever is ailing us, the sutras have a practice to treat it. And so if we do the practice and it doesn't work, like really do it, like not like, yeah, I tried that for a couple of weeks and I still feel the same way. But if Satchidananda kala nairantarya sakara sevito dodabhumihi and it doesn't work, Patanjali's going, okay, then try this. And he just never runs out of possibilities. The only, I guess, caveat to that is in the 8 limbs of yoga, it starts with yama, the moral precepts. And again, Patanjali is, I think, non-dogmatic in that he doesn't say it's bad to steal, it's bad to lie, it's bad to do violence, these are bad things, you're a bad person. He says, okay, you want a steady mind? Here's how you do it. Don't steal, because if you steal, you will be disturbed. Don't be awful to people, because if you are, you will be disturbed. So he even treats kind of common ethics and morality in the context of the personal responsibility to maintaining an equanimous mind, which is our responsibility. No matter what's going on out there, that's our responsibility. And it's different. I have worked with a number of yoga teachers throughout my life, and the good ones wanted me to grow out of them, wanted me to grow beyond their, like, the limits of their personality. So they were like, okay, and there would always be a point where they would start to pull away, and I would panic and get my feelings hurt and all that, but they were pulling away because they wanted to remind me, you are responsible for this. Like, I'm not responsible for this. This is all you. And that, I think, is what both differentiates yoga from religious systems, but it's also what allows yoga to coexist in a very powerful and kind of resonant way with any faith, It doesn't interfere with faith because it is about practice. There's not a lot of belief tangled up in there. Even the Purusha Prakriti thing, this idea of Atman and matter and all that, which you find in all the religious traditions, is so non-dogmatic in Patanjali. And there's so many ways to accommodate it to religious and faith systems where there's no conflict. So it's fun because, like, you don't have to. I have a lot of people reading my book who aren't Hindu, you know, like who are Christian big time, or Jewish. My one of my so my daughter's-in-law is very Jewish. She's really getting a lot out of the book. And some people who are like completely agnostic, and it all works because Patanjali just isn't getting involved in all that. He's just saying, this is about you, you know, it's about your mind and who has the reins of your mind. Either the ego is driving the mind, or the buddhi, the higher intelligence, is driving the mind, or the Atman is driving the mind. And so our goal in yoga is to let Atman drive the vehicle. And then we're having a great time. You know? Yeah, it's a big goal.
Has it been challenging for you to take ownership of your own inner experience that you're having?
That has to be a rhetorical question. Like, honestly, I told my husband Liam is also a yogi and owns a shala with me and does yoga church with me. And, you know, he's with me every day. And I said, you know, it's aggravating because I've written this book and I've written it about this kind of full experience of yoga, and I haven't gotten there yet. Like, I'm not there yet. You know, I still work really hard at this stuff. Like, sometimes I'm just working on yama, you know, just like not lying to people to get myself out of stuff. And sometimes I'm just like, you know, I go 3 or 4 days and I haven't had a decent meditation, and, you know, that's like real. And I say, you know, I will never present myself as someone who's like arrived or has any like guru status, because it's just, and that's not the way I wrote the book. So I kind of wove my personal experience throughout the book, mostly in ways to say, and sometimes it was very vulnerable. Like when I was talking about lying or stealing, I told some personal stories that were kind of like, I can't believe I'm going to tell people this, you know. But that's real, and I'm not at all interested in projecting an image of myself that is not real. I mean, that just to me is poison. So yeah, it's really hard, and some days it's easier. And without the community of people that I spend time with working around these sutras, I would be lost. If I were doing this on my own, I would probably think I was a lot further along than I am, you know.
But specifically in the regard to taking like responsibility for the experience that I'm having and not making excuses like this is because of my parents or this is because of society or whatever it is, that I think is a challenge. Like the mind is often quick to do that.
Yeah, so
right. It doesn't want to take the responsibility. It's too much. It's too big of a burden. It's easier, huge. Like you said, to let yourself off the hook in a way and just say, I'm not in control, really.
I mean, samskaras are real. You know, they're real. The impressions made in the mind by past experience, the conditioned mind is real. It's not that it's imaginary. So this is what we've got, you know, and some yogis believe this has been accumulating over many births, not just this one, but even this one, there's enough. So it's real. And I don't think it's about like, oh, you know, your pain. It's not spiritual bypassing where you're like, yeah, you know, if you're a yogi, then all that stuff that happened to you doesn't matter anymore. And all the impressions it created, you just need to, but it's about when these things arise, having practice to deal with the sensation, you know, the mental sensation, whatever it is, and then having the practice be able to help you dissolve the suffering that has accumulated inside of us. So practice is like, I've been sanding this giant nightmare of a metal porch this summer that needs to be repainted, and like first I did the pressure washing, and that was really satisfying because that's like fast, you know. And then I like started to sand different areas that were rusted, and I started to go, why am I even doing this? I don't want to paint this porch, you know. And then now that I've got most of it sanded, I'm having to prime, and like painting this porch is going to take the whole summer, like legit. And so many times I'm like, why am I doing this? And we can feel like that, like I don't want to deal with all this stuff. Like I want it to go away. I just want it to like leave me alone, or I want to pretend like it's not there, or I want to blame somebody else when it does come up. But yoga is so powerful because the practices, you don't even have to, in other words, you don't have to go to your mat going, okay, today I'm dealing with my first boyfriend, and all that junk that he left in my heart, and all the feelings I have when I think about him, and all, we just get on our mats and we see what arises. And it arises, and if we're practicing with non-attachment, if we're not clinging to what arises, it arises and it disperses, and we're light, like it's gone. There's in the Ashtanga yoga tradition, there's a chant we sing at the beginning before we start practicing, the Vande Gurunam, and it's a chant to Patanjali. Vande Gurunam Charanavinde Sandarshita Swatma Sukhavabode Nishrayase Jangalikayamane Samsara Hala Hala Mohashantiye. That part, samsara, all of our births, all of our experience, all the junk. Hala hala, the gunk that lives inside us, the heaviness, the tar of our conditioned existence. Moha shantiye. Moha is liberation, shantiye is peace. And what it says is this practice can churn up the lake of samskaras, the samsara hala hala, like that story when the devas and the asuras are like churning the lake and all the junk's coming up. It'll churn up what's in us, and that will rise up and dissolve. And that's the beauty of practice, is it churns. So it's not that we're going, yeah, that stuff doesn't matter anymore because I'm a yogi and I got my mind under control. It's that we're like, okay, we're going to do these practices, whatever they are. Pranayama, he tells us, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, 8 things. And while we do these practices, we can fully expect this churning of the lake of our past to bubble up and choke us. And then if we are not attached, if we can just like have that experience of emotion or anger or whatever and watch it dissolve, and it will dissolve. And people over here, they don't know how to describe it, but yoga does something different than a good run or a great tennis match or going to the gym or, jumping jacks or whatever. Even something therapeutic like writing or journaling or psychotherapy. These practices are profoundly effective at liberating us from conditioned impressions, conditioned existence. So it's not about blame, like who do we blame? It's about what do we do with this hala hala, with this sludge, what do we do with it? Because here it is. I don't know who put it there. Maybe my mom did, maybe my dad, but I'm responsible for now what? Now what do I do?
Making the choice to do the practices.
Yeah, to practice and to also, what you notice in Ashtanga yoga, and I'm sure it happened to me in integral yoga, is you start a yoga practice, you've stumbled in from wherever you are, like, okay, I'm here, like, show me how to stretch, I'm really tight. And you start to do these things, whatever the yoga practices are, and you start to feel amazing really fast. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in love. And then for a little while, you're floating on this, like, and that's really great. And it keeps you in. And then you start to churn enough so that the hala hala starts to bubble up. And all of a sudden, you're like on your mat and you're crying. And you're like, what the heck? What is this? I'm supposed to feel good. And just about the time that the practices start to churn this lake of samskaras, samsara, hala, hala, churning up, you're like, get me out of here. And people, they're out, because it's too intense. So what yoga allows is like, okay, we have 8 different things that we're going to do. And if you can move around, but just be aware that what you're treating is conditioned existence. You're treating the fundamental dis-ease of the mind. and this is serious business, you know? So I think I've been practicing for a long time without break and with a lot of faith. And I am much, much lighter than when I came in 2020. And 2000. I was kind of a wreck in 2000, like really, actually, kind of a wreck. And my relationships were a wreck, and just there was a lot of chaos. And now, however many, 24 years later, the hala is a lot more refined, do you know? It's like there's still stuff, but it's not like demons with fly, you know, it's not like the super gross, scary, nasty stuff that used to bubble up out of that lake in the first 10 years or so. It's a long haul. So, you know, yoga is a long haul practice. There's no quick fix, and it's relentless. So yeah, you just keep showing up.
What do you think happens for someone who makes the choice to avoid all of this? Like it feels like it's too much to deal with the churning, to deal with my mind. I don't want to do it, and so I'm just going to keep going. Yeah.
Well, so Patanjali has a couple of sutras that suggest that if you're a person of great bhakti, if you have like the capacity for great devotion, you should do that, because it's fast track. He says Ishvara Pranidhananda. So for those who can devote their entire lives to God, do that, because that's a fast track to the same destination, which is peace, you know? Yoga is not a practice suited for all temperaments, you know? It tends to work well for people who have kind of come to the end of their options. I mean, the people that I know who have benefited greatly and profoundly from yoga were in an enormous amount of pain when they showed up. They were like, okay, you know what? I have run out of things to do here. Like, I can't actually live with this anymore. So if you look around, I'm not talking about like, you know, casual yoga, but if you look at deep yoga communities, what those people tend to have in common is very intense experiences of suffering that have kind of driven them to this practice. It's not the only thing that works, you know? Religion works for some people. Some people can experience their lives without deep, profound suffering, you know? They just don't have that karmic situation. And that's okay, you know? And that's the other cool thing, is that yoga is not like it's our way or the highway. Like, this is the only way. And Patanjali, there are a couple of times when he just says, or you can just believe in God with your whole heart, and then off you go, you know? So I think yoga is, it's not for everybody. I don't mean like everybody can't benefit from samasana, but like the real practice of chitta vritti nirodha is a steep path. Like, it's like for people who think, oh, maybe I'll run a marathon, or, you know, like, I want to write a book, or, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, it's not that people who don't have that sort of ferocious personality can't benefit from yoga practices. Anybody can benefit from, you know, just any aspect of these practices. They're so sweet, you know, they're so beneficial. But to go like deep into the conditioned mind and excavate it and liberate it from hala, this is a lifetime, perhaps many lifetimes journey, you know? And again, it's a hard sell in the West, right? Because we want to know, like, we want the 60 days to, you know, fantastic everything. And it's hard to say in Ashtanga yoga, which is a pretty hardcore practice. They say you're a beginner for 5 years, and you're considered, you know, kind of experienced at 10 years, and you should probably start teaching people after you've been practicing every day for 10 years. You know, so there's just a kind of patience this grows out of a culture very different than ours. The Indian culture and their sense of time and study and practice and building expertise. They play the long game, and Westerners, we're like, our minds are like children, we want the short game and we want to avoid pain. So maybe it doesn't work for everyone, and that's okay. Or maybe when you get a little older, like some people, serious yoga practice is hard until they get to a point where their life is calmed down and, they can make space for it. It's harder for someone in their 20s than for somebody in their 50s,
Depends.
Maybe.
The person.
Yeah, some people are like ready to go. They're
Yeah.
like, and some, but we find our shala is the most regular practitioners are all in their 40s and 50s. The 20-year-olds, look, their asana is amazing, but they've got a lot going on, It's hard for them to, we have a few exceptions, but it's hard for them to commit to that just regular, relentless sankalpa. And that's what yoga
because
really,
maybe it's results oriented in
Totally,
the mind.
yeah.
Like back to what we were talking about at the start. Like that maybe that's a major shift from focus on the end to, because I think that's the only way you can practice for a certain amount of time. Maybe not. Maybe someone can practice for a long time with like that.
Well, no, it's true, because the asana, this is where like the candy is like, the asana, because like your ego is like, I'll go in there because I feel pretty awesome when I can do these poses, so there's a little bit of bait. I think asana, we always joke about asana being the gateway drug to yoga, so like people come in and they get better at asana and their ego's like, all right, I'm on board, until they get hurt or whatever. But that the asana is like such a mild form of yoga. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. But it can be. If it's practiced with the other limbs, it can be really, really strong.
That's why it's a great entryway.
Totally,
that so many people have, because it's like, oh, my body just feels better now. Like,
yeah, and that's really important.
Simple, yeah.
If we don't have ease in our bodies, how are we going to do the more subtle practices, Like if you sit down to do some deep breathing or work with your prana, or if you try to like really get your mind in view, but you're in pain, it's hard.
Yeah.
So like asana is no joke. Like it really does straighten things out, I have a student who he came in with like wrecked knees, like seriously wrecked knees, athlete wrecked knees. And like he couldn't close his knee beyond here. And we do a lot of lotus poses. And he was just like, I can't do this yoga. We're like, no, just stay. And after 4 or 5 years of just really regular, steady practice, he's in Padmasana. He can sit in lotus. And he came in the other day and he goes, this has completely changed my ability to do pranayama and meditation because I can sit now comfortably.
Yeah.
And so it's all connected,
Yeah. I wonder if often we don't realize how much better it can be than the way that it is.
Yeah. And so this is the other, why it's so important to be in a sangha, because I'll tell my students sometimes, look around and see somebody who has what you want. And they don't have to have like a perfect life, but they have something you want, in their being. And ask them, what are you doing? So like we become like beacons for each other. So if you don't have anybody to look up to like, and this is why the kind of guru shisha relationship has been important. It doesn't have to be like a guru. It can just be someone who's been doing this practice for a long time and is in better shape than they were. I have a friend, a really good friend, who's been hanging out with me at my yoga shala for, 10, 15 years. And sometimes he'll say to me, man, you're a mess when you got here. And I'm like, I like to hear that. Because like he's like, and he means my body, my emotions, my mind, my relationships, utter chaos. And, 10 years into practice and not utter chaos. Like still, some little bushfires, and I have not arrived, but so much stira, so much sukha, so much stability, so much comfort. And he's watched me, So we inspire each other that way. And if we try to do this on our own, then we just get lost in our little ego cesspools. We think we're better than we are. We think we're worse than we are. Or we just go, God, this is so boring. Can I just do something else? It's not so hard and it's a lot more fun. So we really have to do these things in community, I think, to make it, I don't know, just because here's what happens when people get into hardcore yoga practice, like 8-limbed yoga practice, and they're not in deep relationship with other people, they dry up. They get really like, there's something that shrivels. They become like, almost like little deserts. And you see it sometimes in their spirituality has this kind of dry, rigid quality. It's not that you have to live with people or, that you have to have a family, but you need to have love in your life. Because this love, this sweetness is, part of the end goal. When our minds are steady, when we have chittavriti nirodha, the equanimous mind, then Atman rises up out of that. And the qualities of Atman are, one of the qualities is bliss, Ananda, sweetness. So we become like loving people, not because we try hard, but because it's our true nature, to be in Ananda and to be aware of what's going on around us. Part of love is just being aware of other people, not being completely preoccupied. So, one of the qualities of Atman is awareness, like, oh, I see you, and bliss, and then knowledge, like, I understand I can act skillfully in this situation. I know how to do that. Oh my gosh, So I think if we're not in deep community, we can get really lost in these practices. You see it sometimes.
I wonder too, along with awareness, if awe is an extremely important component. Do I have awe for this experience that I'm having? It's like foundational respect for the experience.
And that just rises up naturally, I think, when, if you have a deep, I think especially with asana and pranayama, and with meditation, with the kind of formal practices, if you have a kind of deep experience of these practices, that feeling it rises up all the time, and it's uncontrived, like it just pops up out of, and then you're able to have it in other situations, like, I don't know, watching a child play or being in the woods, or just this spontaneous moment of like, yes, and that the practices, without the formal practices, I don't think we clear enough space, we get so heavy. I always tell my students at the end of a practice, whatever arose during this practice or whatever remains with you, like, oh, I did that really well, or my knee hurts, see if you can be in Shavasana and rest and let it dissolve. Like, leave here lighter than you came. Because that's what, hopefully our practices, moha shantiye, hala hala, and then moha, liberate. You're liberated from your sludge, and shantiye, you have peace. So that's why we practice, to like be willing to do a deep dive into this conditioned existence, not to pretend like it's not there, or like, I don't know, just like fake our way through, because like people always want to look better than they are, and then something happens and they flip out and you're like, what was that, So when there's no like bypassing in the practice, because it just dredges up all this stuff. And I think when that happens and we're alone, or even when we experience awe and we're alone, it's cool. But when it happens in community, it's magnificent. Like, it's really, really wonderful. And, that's where the first question you asked me in this was, why did you do this? I did it for my people, This is all for my people. I mean, the reason I'm doing this interview and the reason I'm not very good at promoting myself, whatever, marketing and all that, but every time I go to market, I go, hey, this is for my people, you know? My people are anybody practicing yoga with the goal of the equanimous mind. They are my people. You know? So it really is, that is joyful for me. If I were doing this by myself.
Yeah. I kind of believe that in a way we all have the same purpose. And the purpose is to do something for your people.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yeah. What Swami Shivananda would say, peaceful, useful, useful.
Useful.
Useful. Yep.
To be useful, I think all of our hearts have that desire to be useful in a way. And that's also part of the practice, is to step into that.
And to be able to be useful without asmita, without it just creating more karma. Because like a lot of us want to be useful because secretly we want to be important and we want to leave our mark and we want to have a life of purpose. And, you know, the ego has its own agenda for usefulness. And I think being able to be useful, even if it means just like cleaning up after yourself, you know, like this yoga is so mundane. It cracks me up because people make yoga into this like highly esoteric and blah, blah, blah. And it's not. Like even concentration, meditation, it's so mundane. All it is just keep your mind in one place for 30 seconds or so and see what happens. You know what I mean? Like it's not very esoteric. It's just really hard.
Yeah.
You know?
Actually, I've described it a little differently to myself recently of like the process that's happening is like, I see it as like the mind starts to build sandcastles, you know, and then the practice is seeing, oh, I've just been building sandcastles, and then to allow it to go and get washed and bring the waves and wash away and do it again. And my experience is that after practicing for this amount of time, it's easier to wash away the sandcastles. Whereas before, you know, I would even be aware that the sandcastles were created.
Oh, you were building a fortress around
your
sandcastle. No, I mean, it's the same. These metaphors are really useful. It's the same as dredging up the Lake of Samskaras and all that. Yeah. So they're great stories.
But also not to make it a problem, because that's the other thing that I think like really catches me in like the obsession with the self. Like, oh, there I go building this. There's my mind going again. So it's like, no, this is a part of the human experience. No problem. And I might like to come back to the space.
The most radical kind of awareness that yoga gives us is that I am not this body. I am not this mind. I am not this ego. I am a vehicle for consciousness. And so all this is going to dissolve. It's all going to be worm food. Even my most intense sankalpa is just part of prakriti. It's just a big dance, you know? And I think when we can start to identify the mind, the feeling, thinking, machinating part of ourselves, identify it with Atman, or when we can quiet it down so it reflects pure consciousness, then even our sort of drama becomes kind of light. Because it's all just like, it's like the drama of a thunderstorm. Like, yeah, this is scary, but it's gonna go. So all of our junk, like the ocean's coming for that castle, like it or not. So, and you know, our castles, even if they're really big and made out of concrete, they're gonna wash away one day. So I think identifying the mind with Atman, that's the real gift of the yoga practice, is that we transcend our ego, our smallness, like the ego is just a prison, you know. It's like a little really well decorated prison with like great music and lots to read. You know what I mean? Like one day you're like, I haven't left here ever. You know, yeah, there's a lot to do in here, but I want to get out of here. And that's where yoga says, okay, I'll show you the door. You know, and that's a really the ego is not like an enemy, but it's a tool. You know what I mean? Have you ever been in somebody's house who has like small children 2 or 3 year old children, or maybe like a new puppy.
Yeah, my house, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So when you walk into a house like that and the entire house is covered with kid stuff, like you trip over it everywhere you go, you're like, there's a kid in charge of this house, you know? And no one's really very comfortable. Like I'll have friends say, yeah, I can't have dinner with you because my son doesn't want to go. And I'm like, but your son's 3, you know, like bring him. Like, so I think the ego is like a 3-year-old or a puppy or, you know, beloved and really can be so delightful and has a really important role to play in the personality. But that role is not being in charge, you know, because when that ego is in charge, man, nothing ever gets cleaned up and you have hot dogs for dinner every night. And, you know, like that, these metaphors, I think, help us not feel any kind of hatred or philosophy or resentment toward the ego, but just know, like, your role is not to be in charge. You know, your role is to make sure I brush my teeth, I put on deodorant, I look nice, I cut my hair, I tidy up my area, I get a job, you know, the things that the ego does for us. Like, I have some dignity, have some pride. Like, I don't
show up on time.
I don't say obnoxious things in public. I don't, you know, like the ego, just like a well-behaved child is a delight, an absolute delight. And a well-behaved ego is a delight. But most of our egos have had run of the house, you know, so not so fun. And yeah, you don't want to invite company over because you don't know what's going to happen. And an ego that's out of control is like a child who says, no, you can't go to dinner because I'm having a tantrum, you know, like that. We've had that experience of our own egos. Or when like you come in and your puppy's torn up something that you really care about, like the ego does that.
Or another example is like, I want to go swimming, but I don't want to be seen in a bathing suit.
Totally.
So you're not going to have the experience of going swimming.
Absolutely.
You're missing out. That's the ego being in charge.
The ego is means well. It's trying to protect you from humiliation. Like, that's its job, you know? You can't blame the ego. Like, the problem, you can't blame the kid. I mean, who can blame an out-of-control toddler for their own behavior? We know whose fault that is.
Yeah.
Right? We all know. Yeah. It's like the parents. So the parent in the mind is the buddhi, you know, the intellect, the discriminating intellect. And if we are able to strengthen and refine that part of the mind, then the ego will be in its right relationship, right, to the buddhi. So the yoga practice refines and strengthens the buddhi because it creates a sattvic mind, you know, and that's the quality of a strong buddhi, sattva. So we've got these practices to help. It's like when you call in, you know, that old show like Nanny, Super Nanny, or where there was that British nanny who would come in to out-of-control households and get the kids in shape. She didn't beat anybody, right? She wasn't mean. She was just like, okay, I'm in charge here, and here's how we're going to do this. And at the end, everybody was like, oh, thank you, you know? And that's what happens, I think, when our buddhi, our discriminating, discerning mind, is in charge of the manas, you know, the senses, the ego, the ahamkara, even the indriyas, the way the senses go out into the world. When the buddhi is in charge, everybody's happy and everything's running really well. And that is what the tools of yoga allow us to strengthen and refine and train this part of the mind to do its job, you know? And then the ego is not hammered or rejected or shamed any more than a child in a well-run household feels, you know, ashamed that it can't have what it wants all the time. You know how it is. Happy kids, happy pets. There's usually somebody in charge, and it's not them. So there are all these really cool. We understand, I think, because of our lived experiences, how this mind thing is supposed to work, you know? And just because we know how it's supposed to work doesn't mean we can make that happen. But the practices are the tools to make it happen, you know?
Hence why you titled the book, Practicing.
Practicing the Yoga Sutras. Because the Yoga, I think, this is my big radical statement, I don't think the sutras are philosophy. I think the sutras are a practice manual. I think they're an action manual. Patanjali spends the first book saying, here's why you want to go to all this trouble, because of samadhi. And I'm going to tell you about how amazing samadhi is. And then the second book is, here's how you do it. And that spills over into the third book. And then the third book is, here's how you're going to know that you're getting somewhere. Like, these are some things that are going to happen when your mind starts to become strong and sharp and clear and refined, and when the relationship between ego, senses, and intellect is, ordered in the right way. These things are going to happen to you. Don't be freaked out. This is normal, and don't get attached, but this stuff will happen. And then at the end he says, this is super fun and you love it. However, there's more to it than this. There's this thing called kaivalya, which means you don't even have to inhabit this complex if you don't want to, if you're kind of tired. Or you can stay here in the mind-body complex and be a jivan mukti. You can drive around your car like a NASCAR driver. You can be an expert at the mind-body complex. That's kaivalya, being liberated while in a body. And I just think, Patanjali never really goes into any philosophy. It's all very practical.
I sense so much gratitude that you have for the sutras.
Yeah. People are funny. I do yoga teacher trainings every year, and we teach the Yoga Sutras, we teach the Bhagavad Gita, we teach the Upanishads. And so we're a classical school, so we teach kind of the old stuff, And people either love the sutras and not so much with the Gita, or they love the Upanishads. And I find that the people who really resonate with the Yoga Sutras tend to be people who, like me, are a little rational, analytical. I have an analytical mind, a rational mind. So the sutras really appeal to me because they're just cut and dried. People who are really poetic and creative, they love the Upanishads. And people who are really emotional and have a bhakti personality, they love the Gita. But what I think is that the sutras, if they're experienced not as a kind of, the reason I wrote the book is because I wanted stories in there. People say, oh, the sutras are so dry, and I'm like, no, they're not. They just need a little bit of, they're aphorisms. They're like a geometry proof. They're tiny little things. And so what I did was I just took the little proof and I fluffed it up with, normal language and stories and whatever, because geometry isn't beautiful until you live in a house built by geometry, right? So that's what I tried to do with the sutra book, is take these dry sutras and kind of build a house. Look, there are beautiful commentaries out there. Amazing ones. I read a dozen of them, start to finish, to write the book. This one is different because they're little empty spaces inside the book that ask you to write yourself into the book. So when you finish practicing the Yoga Sutras, you have an object, a book that contains not just Patanjali's thoughts, but your thoughts. It becomes a kind of, not even a journal, but it's a self-study tool, because that's all. I just am into practice, So even reading the book, you don't just get to read the book passively. You have to practice. You have to write. So the book itself is a practice object. You know what I mean? You can't read it. You could just skip that part, not do any of the bubbles, because I'm not into that. But it wouldn't be as I intended it. I intended it to feel like a practice. Just even reading the book, because I think that's where all the good stuff is. In the practice,
personal experience.
Yeah, not thinking about stuff, but doing the thing.
Yeah, because I do notice there's this, there's ability to really compartmentalize in life. So it's I'm studying philosophy here, and when I meet with this group or when I read this book, I'm doing that. But then when I'm doing something else, I'm a completely different person.
Or to think about yoga philosophy in terms of your wife or your best friend or your, I have so many students who are like, my wife needs to read this book. And I'm like, yep, that's where we go. So the thing about this book as an object is that you write yourself into it. Like there's a kind of, it's a little heavy handed because it's like, you'll read a sutra, right? Like Yoga Sutras Vritti Nirodha, and then I'll give you the translation and then I'll tell you about it. And then I'll say, okay, what about you? And I ask a question. And then there's a little bubble where you write so you don't even just think about your response. You like write it down. That's the practice. The practice is like taking pen to paper, it's a thing you do. And the feedback I've gotten from people so far is that process of writing it down has been like a transformational process because it isn't just up here in the bleary recesses of my mind, and it's not like, oh, my friend or my spouse or my child needs to read this. I mean, I do have people who've bought books for people in their family. Like, I'm like, you just do your thing. Let them buy their own book. But I think that my experience as a human being I'm 58 years old, is that practice has launched me into a life I could not have imagined. And I was thinking my way. I mean, I was like in my second graduate school program when I found yoga, living in a pretty dismal place, like on all levels. I mean, I was in financial chaos, emotional chaos, relational chaos, academic, everything was chaos. And these practices have taken me to a new reality. And I deeply believe that I could have never thought my way there. I had to practice my way there, So instead of writing a commentary, because we got enough of those, and they're great. I mean, some of them are amazing. I didn't write a commentary. I wrote a practice book,
I'm so glad you did. Even just for your own experience.
For my own experience,
I can feel how much it's given you.
Well, I'm actually using it. It's funny because like when you write it, like I didn't stop and like answer all the questions. So now I'm like doing it myself. I guess I'm like, I should do this. And it's kind of weird to read your own book. You're like, oh.
It is weird.
Like there should be a comma there, but yeah.
If people are interested in finding it, what's the best way for them to do it?
So you can order it on Amazon. However, it'll take a long time to get to you because of the distributor situation. The best way is to go directly to the distributor and order it from them. It'll get to you quickly. And you can click on that. My website is practicingtheyogasutras.com.
Nice.
All one word. Yeah. So you can just click through there. And I think the Integral Yoga website also has a link to it.
Yeah. Really appreciate this time with you. Thank
Thanks,
you so
Abhi.
much.
Great to meet you.
Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this content and think others might as well, please feel free to share and subscribe.